You didn't click this by accident. Maybe you've felt it lately. A strange quiet where there used to be chaos. A soft detachment where pain once clung to you like skin. You're not broken. You're evolving. But here's the thing. Real healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come wrapped in epiphanies or applause. It arrives like a whisper, while the world is still expecting you to scream. Carl Jung taught that the soul doesn't grow through noise. It grows through integration. Through silence, through the sacred unraveling of everything you thought you had to be. So if you've been wondering, why do I feel calmer, but not quite whole? If the weight is lighter but the map is unclear, you're not lost, you're coming home, and what you're feeling now, that stillness, that emptiness that isn't sad but full of breath, that's one of the first signs, in. For this video, we're not giving you another checklist, we're handing you a mirror, so you can see what your soul has been doing, quietly, patiently, powerfully, because the deepest healing doesn't scream. It transforms. Let's begin. The healing. You didn't know was happening. Healing isn't always a rising. Sometimes it's a dissolving of urgency, of noise. Of all the parts of you that believe survival meant staying on guard, you see, we're conditioned to look for healing in the obvious. The big breakthroughs, the visible milestones, the moments when everything clicks. But Carl Jung taught something radically different. That the true movement of the soul happens in the unseen. That transformation begins, not when the world applauds us, but when we stop apologizing to ourselves. So if lately you felt different, not euphoric, not broken, just still, this is not numbness. It's the beginning of integration. You may no longer cry when they hurt you. You may no longer explain yourself when misunderstood. You may find yourself walking away quietly, not to punish anyone, but because your peace stopped negotiating. This isn't a performance. It's the soft reclamation of yourself. And the most remarkable thing, you probably didn't even notice. When it started, that's how deep healing works. It slips in between the cracks, not to erase who you were, but to remind you who you've always been beneath the noise. In this journey, we'll explore 7 subtle but powerful signs that your inner world is shifting, not according to trends, but according to the timeless depth psychology of Carl Jung. And if even one of these mirrors your experience, then your healing is already underway. Let's go deeper. You've stopped fighting yourself. It doesn't arrive with fanfare, no trumpets, no climactic moment, just a quiet evening when you notice. You didn't shame yourself for feeling tired. You didn't rush to fix your sadness. You didn't call yourself broken for needing space. And that silence? That is healing. One of the first signs that something deep has shifted is this. The war inside you begins to lose interest in fighting. There was a time when your entire life was resistance. You resisted your fear. You wrestled with your anger. You tried to edit your sadness, silence your needs, correct every shadow that didn't match the version of you the world preferred. You were always trying to become, but never allowed to simply be. Carl Jung called this fragmentation. He believed that most of our suffering is not caused by our emotions themselves, but by our refusal to integrate them. When we reject parts of ourselves, we don't eliminate them. We push them into the unconscious, where they gain power in secrecy, the part of you that overreacts, the one who shuts down, the voice that says you're not enough. That's not dysfunction, that's exiled self. But when healing begins, you stop aiming to conquer those parts and start sitting beside them instead. You become less reactive, not because you're numb, but because you've created space between stimulus and shame. Space enough to listen before you judge, to pause before you punish. This shift is subtle. It's so quiet that you might miss it. You'll notice it when you feel anger, and don't spiral. You'll feel it when you cry, and don't apologize. You'll see it in the way you no longer collapse into guilt, just for needing rest, distance, or boundaries. And maybe for the first time, you speak to yourself with gentleness. You say, "It's okay. I understand. I'm here." That voice is new, but it's also ancient. It's you returning. Jung taught that the self is not something we invent. It's the central truth of who we are, buried under decades of defense mechanisms, expectations, and false narratives. And when you stop fighting your shadow, you make room for that self to rise. You no longer fear your triggers, you recognize them. You trace them back to childhood, to trauma, to unmet needs, not as a way to blame, but as a way to understand. And understanding replaces judgment. You stop calling yourself too sensitive. You stop trying to get over it. You stop abandoning your inner world in the name of appearing fine. Instead, you start becoming fluent in your own emotions. You don't silence them, you translate them. Fear becomes, I need safety. Anger becomes, I've been crossed. Sadness becomes, I need space to feel. You no longer see emotions as flaws, you see them as feedback, guidance from the soul, and so the critic in your mind, it softens, it stops screaming. It might still speak, but now you can choose not to obey. That's integration. That's individuation. That's the path Jung devoted his life to mapping. This moment, when you stop waking up with the urge to fix yourself, is sacred. It's not complacency, it's self-loyalty. You begin to see that progress doesn't always mean productivity. That healing doesn't mean becoming someone new. It means allowing every version of you, past and present, to finally sit at the same table without shame. And yes, it might feel strange at first, even uncomfortable, because chaos was familiar. Panic was proof you were trying. The voice that tore you down always felt like truth, but now there's space, a silence. And in that silence, something gentle begins to bloom. You stop fighting your tears. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop holding your breath in every room you enter. You stop hiding. That's not giving up. That's giving in to your wholeness. You realize that there is no better version of you waiting on the other side of perfection. There is only this version. And she is enough, not because she's flawless, but because she's real. Carl Jung said, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. And now you're choosing. Not from trauma, not from pressure, but from a place of deep embodied truth. You're no longer performing for love. You're no longer editing your soul for safety. You're no longer at war with your own reflection. You're simply home. You begin to feel peace in the absence of explanation. There's a kind of peace that doesn't make sense. It arrives without permission, without clarity, without cause. And for a moment, you wonder, is something wrong with me? Because you're not crying like you used to. You're not overthinking like before. You're not searching for meaning in every silence, every pause, every unanswered message. You're just still. This isn't apathy. This isn't denial. This is healing in its most sacred, wordless form. Carl Jung wrote extensively about the numinous, that mysterious presence within the psyche that cannot be explained but must be experienced. To Jung, the soul didn't evolve through logic. It evolved through presence. This stillness you feel, it's not the absence of emotion. It's the absence of reaction. You've stopped bracing for the crash. You've stopped rehearsing your defense. You've stopped needing to prove that you're okay, because for the first time you actually are. Not perfect, not euphoric, but whole enough to rest. This peace comes like soft rainfall on a battlefield that has long since quieted. You don't even realize how long you've been at war until you feel the ground settle beneath your feet, and you notice something. You don't need to explain yourself anymore. Not to them, not to the past, not even to the version of you that was always searching for why. There is no grand theory, no tidy resolution, just breath. And a gentle inner knowing that you are safe inside yourself. That kind of peace used to terrify you, because stillness once meant danger. Silence meant abandonment. The absence of conflict felt like a trap. But now, you welcome it. You find yourself sitting longer with your thoughts, not to solve them, but to simply hear them. You no longer rush to justify your joy. You don't feel guilty for not being in pain. You've stopped seeking permission to feel good. That's not ignorance, that's evolution. There was a time when you believed peace had to be earned, when it had to follow apology, effort, or exhaustion. But now you realize peace isn't conditional, it's available. It's not a prize, it's a return. Jung taught that the self emerges when we stop clinging to the outer world and begin to listen inward. When we drop the need to define every moment and allow it simply to be. So when you feel peace that doesn't come with a reason, when your nervous system quiets in the middle of a life that still holds chaos, trust it. That's your inner world detaching from the patterns that once held you hostage. You stop performing happiness. You stop performing healing. You stop chasing answers in the name of control. Instead, you exist, not as a problem to solve, but as a presence to honor. You notice you no longer over-explain in conversations. You don't rush to defend your choices. You don't justify why you need time, space, stillness. You simply need it. And that's enough. Others may not understand this new quietness. They may say you've changed, that you're distant, that you've grown cold, but what they're really sensing is that you're no longer leaking energy. You're no longer offering your nervous system as a canvas for their chaos. You've made peace your default, not your reward. This doesn't mean you won't feel pain again. It doesn't mean you've transcended suffering. It means that pain no longer owns you. You can hold it without collapsing into it. You can sit with it without becoming it. And you don't need to make a story out of every emotion. You allow things to rise, and then you let them fall. That's integration, and it's often accompanied by grief, because when you feel calm for the first time in a long time, you realize how long you've lived in survival, how often you braced for impact, how many times you mistook stress for strength, and now that the noise has faded, you're left with something unfamiliar: peace, soft, sovereign, sacred. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't compete, it just is. And that's why it's so powerful. Because it can't be faked, it can't be forced, it can only be allowed. Carl Jung believed that once the unconscious becomes conscious, we stop repeating, we stop projecting, we stop reacting. And what rises in its place is peace, not as a concept but as a state of being. You no longer chase it, you carry it, and when it leaves, don't panic. You trust it will return. Because now you know, peace is not found. It's remembered. It was never outside you. It was simply buried beneath the noise. And now that the noise has softened, you can hear yourself again, you can feel your breath, you can rest in your skin, you can be without explaining why. That's not avoidance, that's arrival. You no longer identify with the old version of yourself. There comes a moment on the healing path when you look at who you used to be, not with shame, not with regret, but with tenderness. You remember the version of you who over-explained, who over-apologized, who twisted herself into shapes just to be tolerated, and something in you softens. You no longer judge her, but you no longer believe you are her either. That's the shift. Carl Jung taught that the ego clings to identity, even when that identity is built from pain. We stay in roles, relationships, and dynamics that feel familiar, because even suffering offers a strange sense of safety. But healing begins the moment you stop asking, how do I get back to who I used to be? And start asking, who am I now without the wound? You realize the past version of you was not wrong. She was just trying to survive. She loved with her whole heart, even when it was breaking. She silenced herself, not because she lacked value, but because she had learned that speaking was unsafe, and you carried her through all of it. But you're not her anymore, not because she was weak, but because you've outgrown the life that needed her. That version of you who said yes when she meant no, she was keeping the peace she never knew how to claim. The one who accepted crumbs and called it connection, she thought that was all she deserved. The one who performed, adapted, she thought that was love. But now, you see her clearly, and you thank her. Not by becoming her again, but by letting her rest. Jung called this process individuation, the psychological and spiritual maturation in which the self becomes more than its past, more than its trauma, more than its inherited patterns. You stop living on autopilot. You stop answering to names that no longer fit. You stop playing roles that were never yours to begin with. And you begin to notice you don't resonate with certain conversations anymore. You no longer feel the need to prove your worth in every room. You're no longer drawn to the chaos that once felt like home. This detachment isn't cold, it's clarity. You see the dysfunction, and instead of trying to fix it, you simply walk away. You sense the manipulation, and instead of defending yourself, you stay silent, because silence now feels like power. The stories you once told yourself, I'm too much. I have to earn love. If I don't make them happy, they'll leave. They no longer stick. They sound distant now, like echoes from a language you've forgotten how to speak. And yes, there may be grief, because you realize how long you confused survival with selfhood. But grief in this stage is sacred. It's not the kind that drowns you. It's the kind that cleanses, that makes space, that says, "Thank you for everything you carried, but we don't live there anymore." You no longer idealize the old version of yourself. You no longer try to resurrect her. You stop saying, "I just want to feel like myself again," because now you know the self you were missing wasn't in the past. She was waiting beneath the mask, and slowly you begin to feel her returning. Not the one who people pleased, not the one who overachieved for validation, but the one who knows how to sit in stillness without needing to prove a thing. The one who knows that freedom isn't loud. It's self-loyalty in motion. The ego wants to hold on to what's familiar, but the soul wants to evolve. And when you stop identifying with the version of you that was shaped by trauma, rejection, or cultural expectation, you open the door to something vast and true. You begin to live without costumes, without auditions, without needing to be understood to feel real. Your actions become intentional. Your boundaries become sacred. Your voice returns, not louder but truer. And when someone from your past says, "You've changed," you no longer flinch. You smile, because you have. And not everyone is meant to walk with you through this version of wholeness. Jung believed that this evolution often leads to loneliness at first. Not because you're empty, but because you've cleared the noise. You're no longer willing to sacrifice your peace for proximity. You're no longer willing to abandon yourself for approval. You've stopped identifying with your pain and started living from your power. And that power is not dominance. It's alignment. It's the steady, sovereign decision to choose yourself again and again and again. And when you do, you don't go back. You don't shrink. You don't negotiate with your own soul just to belong somewhere smaller than your truth. You simply keep walking, quiet, rooted, unshakable, because you finally remember who you are. You stop trying to be understood. At some point in your healing, you stop explaining yourself, not because there's nothing left to say, but because being seen is no longer a requirement for feeling real. Carl Jung wrote that the one who begins to individuate no longer seeks confirmation from the outside, not because they've become cold, but because their center no longer wavers. And that's the difference. Before healing, you spent so much energy trying to prove that your emotions were valid, that your boundaries were justified, that your perspective deserved a place in the room. You over-explained. You defended. You made yourself small just to be heard by people who were never really listening. You thought that if you just said it the right way, if you just used softer words, if you were just patient enough, they would finally see you. But healing brings a different kind of wisdom. You realize some people don't misunderstand you by accident. They misunderstand you to maintain control. And you stop participating in that cycle. You stop translating your soul into a language that others have no intention of learning. You stop asking the wrong people to validate your depth. You stop arguing with projections. This shift is not a wall, it's a release. It's the soft, steady moment when you choose your peace over your performance. You feel the urge to explain rising, and you let it pass. You feel the tension building, and you walk away, not to avoid conflict, but to honor your nervous system. You understand that being understood is a gift, not a guarantee, and when you stop expecting it, you stop suffering from its absence. This doesn't mean you isolate. It doesn't mean you shut down. It means you stop abandoning yourself just to feel temporarily accepted. Because now you accept yourself. You listen to your inner voice, even when it disagrees with the crowd. You hold your boundaries, even when they disappoint others. You speak your truth not to persuade, but to stay in integrity with your own soul. And when silence is the clearest answer, you choose it. That silence is not passive. It's sovereign. It says, "I don't need you to agree with me to know that what I feel is true." This is where the shift becomes spiritual. You no longer define your identity by how you're perceived. You no longer outsource your worth to those who can't hold your depth. You choose authenticity over approval. Every time, and yes, you may lose people who only knew the version of you that was desperate to be understood. People who benefited from your people-pleasing. People who called you easy because you never said no. But now, you say no, without guilt, without essays, without rehearsing the right tone. You let them go, not in anger, but in clarity. Because clarity has become more precious than connection, and that clarity changes everything. You no longer seek closure from people who closed the door and walked away. You no longer chase apologies that will never come. You no longer reopen your wounds to prove that they're real. You no longer try to make others get it. You get it, and that's enough. Jung believed that individuation was a lonely path at first, because few are willing to walk through life without the mirror of constant validation. But once you find that internal anchor, you become unshakable. You don't need agreement to feel aligned. You don't need applause to feel worthy. You don't need permission to be free. You become fluent in your own inner language, and you stop translating it for the comfort of others. This isn't bitterness. This isn't ego, it's maturity. It's the sacred moment when your soul says, "My truth is no longer up for debate." You stop seeking to be understood, and you start seeking to be true, to your values, to your rhythm, to your quiet unfolding, and in that space, something unexpected happens. You begin attracting people who understand you without explanation, not because you worked for their approval, but because your authenticity resonates like a tuning fork. They feel you. They trust your presence. They meet you where you are, not where they need you to be, and the ones who don't, they fall away. You bless them silently. You thank them for the role they played, and you continue walking because you are no longer waiting to be chosen. You have chosen yourself, and when you do, when your soul becomes your compass, you don't speak to be heard. You speak to honor what's real, and when that isn't welcome, you no longer force it. You no longer fight for a seat at a table where your presence was always conditional. You build a new table in silence, in truth, in peace. That's how healing sounds, like your voice, no longer needing permission to exist. You begin to move from reaction to response. Before healing, life feels like a storm of triggers. Every word, every tone, every silence, a spark that sets your nervous system on fire. You don't respond, you react. The email goes unanswered for 5 minutes and your chest tightens, someone cancels plans, and you're back in the emotional spiral of rejection. You feel ignored, slighted, misunderstood, and suddenly you're 10 years old again, begging for love with your silence, or defending yourself with too many words. Carl Jung believed that when we are ruled by the shadow, our lives are not led by choice, but by compulsion. The unintegrated parts of us respond not to what's actually happening, but to what it reminds us of. That pause you feel now. Before speaking, before defending, before exploding, that pause is power. It is the space where the ego once lived and where the self now rises. This is the difference between being possessed by your emotions and being present with them. You begin to notice the sensation building, the tightness, the urge, the familiar script playing in your head. But you don't obey it anymore. You breathe, you wait. And in that waiting, something miraculous happens. You realize you don't have to react. You don't have to justify. You don't have to match their energy. You don't have to prove that you're right or worthy or enough. You just observe, not with apathy, but with presence. Jung taught that emotional maturity arises when we integrate our complexes, not when we destroy them, but when we recognize them, see them for what they are, echoes, not commands. That voice that once screamed, "You have to fix this," now feels more like a whisper, one you can choose to ignore. You're not shutting down, you're slowing down, and slowing down is sacred, because for the first time you're not reacting from your wounds, you're responding from yourself. You can feel anger and not become it. You can feel fear and not run from it. You can feel sadness and not let it shape your identity. You're no longer a puppet of your past. This doesn't mean you're calm all the time. It doesn't mean you don't get triggered. It means you recognize the trigger as a mirror, not a command. You say, "I feel this, I honor it, but I don't have to act from it." This is emotional sovereignty. It's not glamorous. It doesn't get applause, but it changes the entire trajectory of your life. Because when your response comes from the self, it heals not just your moment, but your future. The relationships you attract shift. The arguments you once entertained lose their power. The roles you used to play no longer interest you. You don't rush to respond just to fill silence. You don't raise your voice just to feel heard. You don't defend yourself to people who never intended to understand. You become selective, intentional, not out of fear, but out of reverence for your energy. And suddenly, your silence speaks more than your reaction ever did. People notice. They say, "You've changed, you're distant, you don't care." But what they really mean is, you've stopped reacting the way we expect you to, and you have. Because now you choose peace over performance, presence over panic, stillness over self-sabotage. You no longer hand over your emotional regulation to others. You don't need their consistency to feel stable. You don't need their validation to feel safe. You regulate from within. That's not detachment, that's healing. You've rebuilt the bridge between stimulus and response, and in that space, you've found yourself. You're not ignoring your emotions. You're alchemizing them. You're turning old pain into new awareness, old reactivity into discernment, old narratives into inner choice. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But now you see the pattern. You name it, you sit with it, and you let it pass. You no longer treat every discomfort like a fire. You treat it like weather. It comes, it goes. You stay rooted, and when the time is right, when your energy is clear, you respond. Not from fear, but from truth. This is the work, the slow, holy work of remembering that you are not your wound. You are not your defense. You are not the urgency that once drove you. You are the calm after the storm. And that calm, it's not passive, it's earned through every pause, every breath, every sacred moment you chose to hold your center instead of losing yourself again. That's the difference between reacting and responding, and that difference is where your power lives. You no longer abandon yourself to be loved. There was a time when love meant disappearing. You twisted yourself to fit the mold. You silenced your truth to keep the peace. You said yes, while your soul screamed no, because somewhere along the way you were taught that being chosen mattered more than being whole. But now something in you is shifting. You've stopped making yourself small just to be safe. You've stopped bending your values to avoid being left. You've stopped walking out on your own soul just to be allowed in someone else's life. Carl Jung warned that when we trade authenticity for attachment, we fracture, we split, we create a mask, what he called the persona, to earn belonging in systems that never saw our full truth. And in that performance, we lose the one thing we came here to protect, ourselves. But healing reveals a truth so sacred, so quiet, you almost miss it the first time it arrives. You don't have to betray your own boundaries to be loved. You don't have to shape-shift to stay connected. You don't have to abandon your voice to be heard. You simply have to stay with you. That might sound simple, but for someone who has spent a lifetime contorting themselves to keep others close, it's revolutionary. It's the moment when you hear your own intuition whisper, "Not this time." And you listen, even if it disappoints someone, even if it ends the conversation, even if it means standing alone. Because now you understand something. Being loved by others is beautiful, but being loyal to yourself is non-negotiable. You no longer accept relationships that demand your silence as proof of your devotion. You no longer confuse suffering with depth. You no longer call emotional starvation soulmate connection. You see it for what it is, an echo of old wounds, not the resonance of truth. Jung believed that we project our unloved parts outward, and then call the ones who reject them fate. But when you begin to integrate, when you call those abandoned parts of you back home, you stop begging others to love the parts you finally learned to hold. That's healing. It's saying, "I don't need you to validate my worth. I've already remembered it." It's leaving the room when the energy asks you to betray yourself. It's choosing distance over depletion. It's saying, "I love you," and still saying, "But I won't lose myself to keep you." And yes, it's terrifying at first, because there's a part of you, a very old part, that still believes love must be earned. That if you stop pleasing, you'll be punished. That if you stop overgiving, you'll be abandoned. But now you know, abandonment of self is the deepest wound of all, and you refuse to inflict it on yourself ever again. You may find that certain relationships begin to unravel, not because you're bitter, but because you've stopped making yourself bleed to keep them alive. You start recognizing the subtle contracts that once kept you bound. I'll stay small, so you feel big. I'll stay silent so you feel right. I'll stay close even if it costs me myself. And you tear those contracts up, not in anger but in honor. This is self-respect. This is spiritual alignment. This is the soul saying, I belong to me now. You begin to choose partners, friends, and spaces where you don't have to perform wholeness to be loved, where your no is not punished, where your tears are not used against you, where your light doesn't threaten anyone, because now your standards have risen with your self-worth. You no longer tolerate emotional hunger. You no longer mistake adrenaline for passion. You no longer stay in places that drain you just because they feel familiar. You finally see that real love doesn't require your self-abandonment. It requires your presence. And when you're present with yourself, truly present, you begin to attract relationships that reflect that wholeness back to you, not because you demanded it, but because you embodied it. This is the end of a very old cycle, the one where you believed love meant sacrifice, where staying meant shrinking, where compromise meant self-erasure. And this time, you're doing something different. You're not walking away from love. You're walking away from anything that asks you to leave you behind to earn it. Because the one thing you now refuse to give up is yourself. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And you are finally claiming that privilege. You are becoming not perfect, but whole, not invulnerable, but integrated. You're no longer seeking love that requires you to edit your soul. You're seeking resonance, reciprocity, respect. And if that means fewer people, so be it, because peace is no longer something you're willing to trade just to be touched, and self-abandonment is no longer the currency of your connection. You've changed. You've returned. You've remembered love that costs you yourself was never love. Peace becomes your default, not a reward. There was a time when peace felt like a finish line, a rare moment after the fight, after the apology, after the checklist was done and your mask was perfectly in place. Peace was a reward, earned through exhaustion, and even then it never stayed. But now, peace has changed. It's not louder. It's not brighter. It's simply there, soft, quiet, uninterested in proving itself. Carl Jung believed that when the inner world finds order, the outer world loses its power to disrupt us. Not because life gets easier, but because the self becomes anchored. And now you're anchored. You no longer wait for life to be perfect before you feel safe. You no longer need every relationship to feel resolved before your nervous system calms. You no longer treat joy like a fragile guest who might leave at any moment. You trust it. You trust you. This is one of the clearest signs that healing has taken root. Peace is no longer something you chase. It's something you carry. You move through the world with a new rhythm. You walk slower. You speak softer. You no longer feel compelled to defend every decision. You allow space to breathe. In conversations, in silence, in solitude. You find beauty in repetition, in quiet mornings, in doing less and feeling more. In saying no without guilt, in staying in your body when the moment asks you to flee. This peace is not accidental. It is earned through every moment you chose yourself when it would have been easier to abandon, through every reaction you paused, every truth you honored, every time you said, "This is enough." And now, peace isn't a reward for perfection. It's the evidence of presence. It's not an absence of emotion. It's your ability to feel everything without being consumed. It's not the absence of conflict. It's your refusal to create it where none is needed. It's not. It's discernment. And others may not understand. They may say you're colder now, that you've changed, that you're distant. But you know the truth. You're just not leaking energy anymore. You're no longer performing pain for people to take you seriously. You're no longer explaining your light to those who only feel safe in shadows. You've stopped asking the world to make room for you. You've become the room. And in that space, you breathe deeply, freely. Finally, you no longer feel the urgency to fix everything. You no longer sabotage peace the moment it settles in your bones. You don't call calm boring anymore. You recognize it for what it is. Sacred Jung taught that wholeness is not the absence of struggle, but the capacity to stay conscious within it, to meet life not with panic, but with presence. And now, you live from that presence, even when you're sad, even when you're unsure, even when the old voices whisper. You respond, not with fear, but with faith. Not in some external outcome, but in yourself, because you've walked through the fire and you've come back whole. This is what peace looks like, not a final destination, but a quiet companion that walks beside you because you no longer walk away from yourself. You've stopped waiting for peace to be earned. You've remembered it was always yours, and that remembrance, that inner homecoming, is the most powerful healing of all. If you made it here, it's not because you're perfect, it's because you're present. And that's what the healing journey truly asks of us. Not to be better, not to be faster, but to come home, slowly, gently, truthfully, to the parts of us we abandoned while chasing love, success, or safety. Carl Jung once wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart." Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakens. You are awakening, and the signs are not loud, they are subtle, but they are sacred. So keep going. Keep choosing truth over performance, stillness over chaos, your soul over the script. And when the old patterns whisper that you're not enough, remember this moment. Remember what it feels like to not need to prove anything, to simply be. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not broken. You are becoming quietly, powerfully, completely. And if this message reflected even one part of your inner world, you're already further along than you think. Thank you for showing up, for listening, for remembering. If you want to keep walking this path of truth, subscribe to this channel, because here your depth is not just welcome, it's understood. And if you're ready to dive even deeper, discover the hidden wisdom of Jung's map to self-integration in our ebook on healing and individuation. The link is waiting for you in the pinned comment. You're not alone. You never were. And now you walk forward from peace, not toward it. Until next time, stay close to your soul.